So this is one of my old matte paintings I did for the 100, and we have a situation where theoretically the client wants to soften, or we want to soften these elements into their respective depths. Let's say we have some depth of field because this is our focal point, so we want to soften out these images, but if we're not sure exactly how much we want to soften them, we don't want to save out multiple versions of the file. So one way that I normally work with this sort of issue is select your layer, convert it to a smart object, and then double click on the smart object, which will open that layer up as its own in its own file. And if we duplicate this image as a layer and just keep one of them on, we can do all sorts of adjustments to this, and we can still come back here later and restore the original version. So here I'm just changing one. Change the first layer to lighten it. I'm going to soften this layer by, say, 1 pixel, and the third one will just invert it. And alright, so we have 3 different layers, and if I save with just the top one, which I could call this lighter, and I save this image, and if we just watch here, you'll see this will update. There you go. So for an adjustment like that, it's you don't need to you could just add a levels adjustment on top, but if it was the softening that we wanted, this 1 pixel blur, we can save it as a smart object, duplicate the layer, blur it, and save it back. Now, one of the other ways you can do it is simply by creating a smart object. Now if you blur a smart object itself, like if we do a 5 pixel blur on this, it's actually adding a smart filter here. Now in my experience, the faster method is to save it as its own file, because I think for the way that Photoshop caches and rasterizes the images, when you save this image, it saves the layer out and bakes it in, whereas this here, the smart filter, is somewhat live, but it is a better way to it's more interactive to do this solution. But if you quite often, I've had to blur layers in multiple ways, either motion blur, or 5 pixel blur, or 2 pixel blur, or something like that. So I'll save out a smart object, blur duplicate the layer, and then you have the originals underneath.